The power went out at exactly 11:47 p.m. Sarah Mitchell remembered because she had just looked at her watch, wondering if she should wake the campers for the midnight astronomy session they had planned. The lights flickered once, twice, then darkness swallowed Camp Pinewood whole. That was August 15th, 1985. By sunrise, 6 camp counselors had vanished without a trace. No footprints, no signs of struggle, no goodbye notes left behind. Just 6 empty beds in the staff cabin and 42 terrified children asking where their counselors had gone. The local sheriff would later describe it as if they had been plucked from existence. Search teams combed through 3,000 acres of Oregon wilderness. Bloodhounds picked up scents that led nowhere. Helicopters with thermal imaging found nothing. For 39 years, Camp Pinewood's darkest night remained an unsolved mystery. Families held on to hope that turned to grief. Investigators followed leads that crumbled into dead ends. The camp itself closed within a year. Its cabins left to rot among the Douglas firs. But in March 2024, a wildfire tore through those same woods, and what the flames revealed would finally answer the question that had haunted an entire generation. Where did the counselors of Camp Pinewood go? The truth was far more disturbing than anyone had imagined. This is the story of that night, the decades of searching that followed, and the shocking discovery that proves some disappearances aren't random at all. They're planned. Before we go deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The questions that haunted investigators for nearly 4 decades were simple, but their answers would shake a small Oregon town to its core. How does an entire storm knock out power to just one isolated summer camp, while leaving the surrounding areas untouched? Why would 6 experienced counselors abandon 42 sleeping children in the middle of the night? And perhaps most chilling, what was buried beneath Cabin 7 that law enforcement didn't want families to know about? Tonight, we're going to walk through every detail of that August night in 1985, from the perspective of the only witness who saw what really happened, a 12-year-old camper named Jennifer Hayes, who stayed silent for 32 years before finally coming forward. We'll meet the 6 counselors who disappeared. Sarah Mitchell, 23, a biology student planning her future. Tom Bradley, 25, an aspiring youth minister. Rebecca Chen, 22, training to be a social worker. David Armstrong, 26, a military veteran turned outdoor educator. Lisa Warren, 24, a musician spending her last summer before marriage. And James Sullivan, 27, the head counselor who had worked at Camp Pinewood for 6 consecutive summers. 6 people, 6 lives, one night that changed everything. Camp Pinewood sat in the Cascade foothills about 70 miles east of Portland, Oregon. Established in 1952 by the local Methodist Church, it had served generations of children from across the Pacific Northwest. Parents trusted Camp Pinewood. It had an unblemished safety record, trained staff, and a reputation for transforming shy kids into confident young people over the course of 8 weeks each summer. The summer of 1985 was supposed to be like any other. Sarah Mitchell had arrived in June with her worn copy of A Field Guide to Western Birds and plans to teach campers about the natural world. Her mother would later tell investigators that Sarah called home every week, excited about the kids, excited about the programs they were running. There was no hint of anything wrong, no indication she was planning to leave. Tom Bradley wrote letters to his grandmother that police would later analyze for hidden meanings. In one dated August 10th, just 5 days before the disappearances, he talked about his plans for seminary school that fall. He described a particularly touching moment when a camper thanked him for helping her overcome her fear of water. "This is what I'm meant to do," he wrote. "I've never been more certain of my calling." Rebecca Chen kept a journal. Page after page of observations about child psychology, notes about how different kids responded to structured activities versus free play. Her last entry was dated August 14th at 9:15 p.m., less than 3 hours before the power would fail. She wrote about tomorrow's plans. Pottery in the morning, lake swimming in the afternoon, campfire songs after dinner. Everything is running so smoothly. I'm going to miss this place when summer ends. David Armstrong had served in Germany with the Army and came home struggling to adjust to civilian life. Camp Pinewood gave him purpose. His sister told reporters he seemed happier that summer than he had been in years. He'd even started talking about buying land nearby, maybe start his own outdoor education program. He wanted to build something permanent. Lisa Warren was engaged to her high school sweetheart, Michael Torres. They had a wedding planned for October 12th. She had sent her mother fabric swatches for bridesmaid dresses just 2 weeks before she vanished. Michael would keep those swatches in a box for the rest of his life, unable to throw them away, unable to accept that the woman he loved had simply chosen to disappear. James Sullivan was the glue that held the staff together. At 27, he was both the oldest and most experienced counselor. He had a natural ability to defuse conflicts, to know when a homesick camper needed a phone call home versus when they just needed distraction. The camp director, Robert Hayes, called James irreplaceable. Hayes trusted him completely, which is why James had the master key to every building on the property. That key would become crucial to understanding what happened. These were not troubled people, not runaways, not individuals with secret lives waiting to explode. They were ordinary 20-somethings doing work they loved, surrounded by children who adored them. But something changed in the days before August 15th. Jennifer Hayes, the camp director's daughter, who was 12 that summer, would later tell investigators she noticed James Sullivan having hushed conversations with the other counselors. She remembered seeing them gathered near the equipment shed on August 13th, their voices low, their faces serious. When she approached, they quickly scattered. She also remembered something else, something she didn't think was important at the time. James had been spending a lot of time in the camp office, using the shortwave radio. The camp director kept detailed logs of everyone who came and went from the property. On August 14th, a delivery truck arrived with supplies that weren't on any purchase order. The driver signed in as R. Patterson Northwest Wholesale. When investigators later tried to track down Northwest Wholesale, they discovered the company didn't exist. The delivery included 48 cans of food, 12 gallons of water, 6 sleeping bags, rope, tarps, flashlights, and batteries. Enough supplies to keep 6 people alive in the wilderness for weeks. James Sullivan signed for the delivery personally. Then he carried everything to Cabin 7, the counselor's cabin, and August 15th, 1985. Started like every other day that summer. Morning swim lessons, arts and crafts, kids running through the trees, playing capture the flag, laughter echoing across the lake. Sarah Mitchell taught a group of campers how to identify birdsong. Tom Bradley led a hiking group to Cascade Falls. Rebecca Chen helped campers write letters home. The weather forecast called for clear skies. No storms. No reason to expect anything unusual. Dinner was spaghetti and garlic bread, served family style in the mess hall at 6 p.m. The counselors sat with the kids. Same as always. James Sullivan made an announcement about the next day's schedule, a special trip to a nearby nature preserve. The kids were excited. As the sun set, the evening campfire began. Songs were sung. S'mores were roasted. Stories were told. The younger campers headed to their cabins at 8:30, the older ones at 9:30. Lights out was at 10 o'clock. Jennifer Hayes had cabin duty that night, which meant staying awake to make sure her assigned group of campers were settled. She remembered the stars were incredibly bright. She remembered thinking how peaceful everything was. At 11:15 p.m., she saw James Sullivan walking toward the equipment shed. He was carrying a large duffel bag. At 11:30 p.m., she saw Sarah Mitchell following the same path. At 11:40 p.m., Tom Bradley, Rebecca Chen, David Armstrong, and Lisa Warren all emerged from Cabin 7 and walked toward a tree line behind the camp office. Each carried backpacks. None of them spoke. They moved with purpose, like they knew exactly where they were going. Jennifer watched from her cabin window. She didn't understand what she was seeing. Were they going on a night hike? Was this some kind of staff training exercise? Then, at 11:47 p.m., the power went out. Every light in Camp Pinewood died at once. The main building, the cabins, even the security lights that normally stayed on all night. Darkness, so complete that Jennifer couldn't see her own hand in front of her face. She heard a child crying in one of the nearby cabins. Then another, then several. Kids waking up, frightened by the sudden blackness. Jennifer fumbled for the flashlight she kept by her bed. When she finally got it working and looked out the window again, the 6 counselors were gone. What Jennifer didn't know, what no one knew until the investigation decades later, was that the power outage wasn't caused by a storm or mechanical failure. Someone had deliberately cut the main electrical line. The cut was clean, precise, made with professional equipment. It was done in a location that required knowing exactly where the camp's electrical system was vulnerable, and it was timed to coincide with the counselor's departure. When the camp director, Robert Hayes, finally got emergency lights working about 20 minutes later, he immediately noticed 6 counselors missing from their beds. He assumed they were dealing with frightened campers or checking the electrical system. It wasn't until dawn, when none of them had returned and 42 children were asking where their counselors were, that panic set in. The first 911 call came at 6:47 a.m. on August 16th. By 8 a.m., the Cascade County Sheriff's Department had deputies searching the property. By noon, they had state police assistance. By evening, over 100 volunteers were combing the forest with flashlights and calling names into the darkness. Sarah, Tom, Rebecca, David, Lisa, James. No response. The search dogs were brought in on day 2. German shepherds trained to track human scent. They picked up trails leading from Cabin 7 toward the northeast section of the property, but the scents vanished at a logging road about half a mile into the woods, as if the counselors had gotten into vehicles. But there were no tire tracks, no evidence of cars. The logging road hadn't been used in months, according to Forest Service records. By day 3, the FBI was involved. 6 adults don't just disappear. There has to be evidence, has to be something, but there was nothing. Well, almost nothing. On day 5 of the search, a volunteer found a small notebook hidden under a loose floorboard in Cabin 7. It belonged to James Sullivan. Most of the pages were innocuous. Supply lists, activity schedules, camper notes. But the last page, dated August 14th, contained a single sentence that made no sense to investigators at the time. The walls have ears. We move tomorrow when they can't listen. Who was listening? Move where? Why? The local sheriff, Daniel Morehouse, believed the counselors had orchestrated their own disappearance. Maybe they'd joined a cult. Maybe they'd planned to start a commune. Maybe they were running from something. People don't vanish by accident, he reasoned. They choose to disappear. But the families refused to believe it. Their children weren't runaways. Their children had futures planned. Their children wouldn't abandon 42 kids in the middle of the night. The case went cold by October 1985. The counselors were legally declared dead in 1992, 7 years after they vanished. Camp Pinewood closed in 1986 and was never reopened. The buildings were abandoned, left to decay. The property was eventually seized for unpaid taxes and purchased by a timber company that had no interest in developing it. For 38 years, the forest reclaimed what had been taken from it. The cabins rotted. The mess hall collapsed. Nature buried the memories of that terrible August night until March 17, 2024, when lightning started a fire that would burn over 12,000 acres and finally reveal the truth. If you're still with us at this point, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. Are you listening to this at home, during your commute, late at night when you can't sleep? We read every single comment, and we want to hear from you. The wildfire that swept to the old Camp Pinewood property in March 2024 was eventually contained, but not before it had stripped away decades of forest undergrowth, exposed old foundations, and revealed something that should never have existed. A firefighter named Marcus Webb was conducting a post-fire safety inspection when he noticed an irregularity in the ground behind where Cabin 7 had stood. The earth had collapsed into what appeared to be a void space. When the fire department investigated, they found concrete stairs leading down into darkness, an underground bunker, hand-constructed, never on any camp blueprints or county building records, hidden beneath the forest floor for at least 39 years. The Cascade County Sheriff's Department, now under Sheriff Amanda Torres, who had been a rookie deputy when the counselors disappeared, secured the site and called in forensic teams. What they found inside that bunker would rewrite everything anyone thought they knew about August 15th, 1985. The bunker was approximately 14 feet by 20 feet, built with reinforced concrete walls and a ventilation system that drew air through concealed pipes. It contained 6 sleeping areas, shelving units, a makeshift bathroom, storage containers, and remnants of supplies that had been delivered on August 14th. On one wall, someone had carved 6 names: Sarah, Tom, Rebecca, David, Lisa, James. But the bunker was empty. No bodies. No evidence of violence. Just a carefully constructed underground space that had clearly been lived in for some period of time. The forensic team found journals. Water damaged, but partially readable. They found personal items: Sarah's bird guide, Lisa's engagement ring, Tom's Bible, Rebecca's psychology textbooks, David's military dog tags, James's master key to Camp Pinewood. And they found something else. Something that explained everything and simultaneously made the mystery even deeper. A series of letters, sealed in plastic bags to protect them from moisture. Letters written by the 6 counselors, addressed to whoever finds this. Sarah Mitchell's letter was dated September 3rd, 1985, 19 days after the disappearance. If you're reading this, then you found what we built. You found our sanctuary. I wish I could explain in a way that makes sense. But the simple truth is we had no choice. The camp wasn't what it seemed. Robert Hayes wasn't who he claimed to be. We discovered something we weren't supposed to know, and staying meant putting the children in danger. Leaving meant abandoning them, but we had to survive long enough to get help. We stayed here for 11 days before we made our next move. If everything went according to plan, authorities should have been notified by now. If you're reading this years later and nothing changed, it means we failed. It means Hayes won. Rebecca Chen's letter filled in more details. James found the files in Hayes' office on August 10th. Children who had been at the camp in previous summers, reported as runaways weeks or months after they left. Always the troubled kids, the ones whose families were less likely to push for answers. Hayes was selecting them, documenting them, and we think he was selling them. We didn't want to believe it. We needed proof before we could go to police. But on August 13th, Hayes called a special staff meeting, and his questions made it clear he knew we suspected something. We had maybe 48 hours before he moved against us. We had to disappear, protect ourselves, and buy time to expose him. Tom Bradley's letter described the plan. James designed a bunker years ago, back when he thought maybe we needed an emergency shelter for campers in case of forest fire. He built it in secret with David's help during the off-season. It was supposed to be a safety measure. Instead, it became our hiding place. The fake supply delivery was our way of stocking it. The power outage was our diversion. We thought we'd stay underground for a week or 2, then surface with everything we needed to bring Hayes down. But the letters ended there. There were no entries past September 3rd. The forensic team excavated around the bunker and found something that made investigators' blood run cold. Disturbed earth, carefully concealed. And when they dug deeper, they found remains. Not 6 sets of remains. 7. The 6 missing counselors, identified through dental records and DNA analysis. And a 7th body, older male, approximately 50 to 55 years old at time of death. Robert Hayes, the camp director who had reported the counselors missing. The man who had led searches. The man who had comforted families and given tearful interviews to news crews about the tragedy. Robert Hayes had been dead since August 1985. The forensic pathologist determined all 7 individuals died from carbon monoxide poisoning. The bunker's ventilation system, designed to pull in fresh air, had been deliberately blocked from the outside. They had suffocated in their underground sanctuary. But who blocked the vents? Who killed them? The answer came from a source no one expected. Jennifer Hayes, now 51 years old, the camp director's daughter who watched the counselors disappear that August night. She called Sheriff Torres in April 2024 and said 4 words that changed everything. "My uncle did this." Jennifer Hayes walked into the Cascade County Sheriff's Office on April 18, 2024, carrying a box of documents she had hidden for 39 years. "I was 12, she told Sheriff Torres. I didn't understand what I was seeing, and by the time I was old enough to understand, I was too afraid to come forward. The story she told painted a picture far more complex than anyone had imagined. Robert Hayes wasn't operating alone. His younger brother, William Hayes, was his partner in a child trafficking ring that had been using Camp Pinewood as a recruitment ground since 1978. They targeted children from broken homes, kids who wouldn't be missed immediately, kids whose parents might believe they'd run away. Over 6 summers, at least 14 children were taken from Camp Pinewood and sold to adoptive families who paid cash and didn't ask questions. Most of these adoptions occurred after camp ended. When kids had returned home, William Hayes would contact families weeks later, offering what he described as troubled teen intervention services. Parents desperate to help children who were acting out would sometimes agree. The children would be placed in what Hayes called a therapeutic wilderness program. They were never heard from again. The counselors discovered the operation by accident. James Sullivan, while looking for camp equipment inventory lists in Robert Hayes' office, found a second set of files hidden in a locked drawer. Names, photos, notes about which children were good candidates, contact information for buyers. The counselors confronted each other first, trying to make sense of what they'd found. Could they be misunderstanding? Was there an innocent explanation? But then Robert Hayes started asking questions. Strange questions. Pointed questions about who had been in his office, who had access to the locked drawer. The counselors knew they were in danger. They knew Hayes wouldn't let them leave with what they had discovered. They needed evidence, needed time, needed a way to survive long enough to expose him. The bunker was their answer. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that William Hayes had been watching them. He had seen the supply delivery. He had followed them during their hushed conversations. He knew they had found something. On the night of August 15th, while the counselors were hiding in their bunker believing they were safe, William Hayes was systematically eliminating the one person who could identify him, his brother Robert. Robert Hayes died in his office. A single gunshot wound to the head, disguised as a suicide. William Hayes then dragged his brother's body to the bunker. He knew about it because he had helped James and David build it years earlier, presenting it to Robert as a project to keep the counselors busy during off-season. William Hayes sealed the 6 counselors inside with his brother's body, then blocked the ventilation system. It took approximately 48 hours for carbon monoxide to build to lethal levels in the sealed space. The counselors died together, unaware they were breathing poison. Their final journal entries show no panic, no realization that death was coming. They simply fell asleep and never woke up. William Hayes, meanwhile, played the role of devastated uncle, helping coordinate searches, comforting Jennifer, maintaining the fiction that the counselors had run away. He died in 2019 from natural causes, taking his secrets to the grave. Or so he thought. Jennifer Hayes had seen her uncle the morning after the counselors disappeared. She was 12, frightened by the power outage and the missing adults. She went to her father's office looking for comfort and found her Uncle William sitting at her father's desk, going through files. "Where's Daddy?" she had asked. "He had to go into town early," William had told her. Emergency with the electrical company. But Jennifer saw something on the desk that made no sense. Her father's wedding ring. Her father never took off his wedding ring. Never. When Robert Hayes' body was eventually found weeks later, identified as remains in a burned vehicle 15 miles away, the result of what appeared to be an accident, the wedding ring was not among his personal effects. Jennifer kept that ring. She hid it in her room, then kept it through college, through her marriage, through 39 years of life. She never told anyone because she didn't understand what it meant, and later because she was terrified of her uncle. But when William Hayes died in 2019, Jennifer began compiling evidence. She went through her father's belongings, which her uncle had stored in a storage unit. She found files, correspondence, financial records showing payments from anonymous sources, photos of children who had disappeared. She found proof. And in March 2024, when the wildfire revealed the bunker and the remains were discovered, Jennifer knew it was time. The documents she brought to Sheriff Torres included names of 14 children taken between 1978 and 1985, contact information for people who had facilitated the trafficking, and bank records showing William Hayes had profited to the tune of over $3 million. The FBI reopened not just the case of the missing counselors, but investigations into each of those 14 missing children. By June 2024, they had located 9 of them, now adults, living under assumed names, some knowing they had been stolen from families, others believing the lies they'd been told about being unwanted. 5 were never found. The 6 counselors who tried to save those children died, trying to do the right thing. They didn't run away. They didn't abandon their responsibilities. They tried to be heroes, and they were murdered for it. In November 2024, Sarah Mitchell's mother, now 82 years old, was invited to a ceremony in Cascade County, Oregon. The old Camp Pinewood property, purchased by the state after the wildfire, was being converted into a memorial park. The bunker where the 6 counselors died had been filled in and covered with a granite monument listing their names and dates. But it was what stood beside the monument that made Sarah Mitchell's mother cry. 6 oak trees, planted in a circle. 6 benches, each with a plaque describing the counselor it honored. And in the center, a 7th tree, larger than the others, with a plaque that read, "In memory of the children we couldn't save and the courage of those who tried." During the dedication ceremony, one of the survivors, a woman named Patricia Morrison, who had been taken from Camp Pinewood in 1982 at age 10, spoke about the counselors she had never met. "I didn't know them," she said. "I was gone before they arrived. But I know they died trying to stop what happened to me and 13 other children. I know they were braver than they had to be. I know they could have walked away, reported what they found to police from a safe distance, and probably survived. But they stayed. They tried to gather irrefutable evidence because they knew the Hayes brothers had connections, had money, had the ability to make accusations disappear. They wanted to make sure justice was certain, and it cost them everything." Patricia Morrison was one of the lucky ones. She had been sold to a family in California who, while they had obtained her through illegal means, actually loved and cared for her. She grew up believing her biological parents had given her up for adoption willingly. It wasn't until the FBI contacted her in 2024 that she learned the truth. Her mother had been searching for her for 42 years. They reunited in August 2024, exactly 39 years after the counselors disappeared. Not everyone's story had a happy ending. 2 of the recovered children had been placed with families who abused them. 3 had been sold to people who used them for labor. 1 had spent years in the foster care system after his adoptive parents decided they didn't want him anymore. And 5 children were never found, their fates unknown. The case against the network that William Hayes had been part of continued into 2025. Federal prosecutors charged 12 individuals with conspiracy to commit kidnapping and human trafficking. 8 pled guilty. For when to trial, Jennifer Hayes, who spent 39 years carrying the weight of knowledge she couldn't share and fear she couldn't escape, testified at every trial. She explained how her father had been murdered by his own brother, how her uncle had terrorized her into silence with threats that she would be next if she ever spoke. "I was 12 years old when 6 good people died trying to protect children," she told the court. "I lived with that for almost 4 decades, believing I could have stopped it if I'd been braver, smarter, older, but I was a child myself. And my uncle was a monster who knew exactly how to manipulate fear." The jury in the final trial deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. But perhaps the most unexpected resolution came in January 2025, when a woman in British Columbia contacted the FBI claiming to be one of the 5 missing children. Her name was Christine Parker, and she had been taken from Camp Pinewood in July 1984 at age 9. She had grown up believing she was an orphan adopted by a family in Canada. But when she saw the news coverage about the recovered children, something triggered a memory. A red ribbon in her hair, a cabin by a lake, a counselor named James who taught her how to skip stones. DNA testing confirmed her identity. She was one of the children the 6 counselors had died trying to save. She flew to Oregon in February 2025 and visited the memorial. She sat on the bench dedicated to James Sullivan and read his story. Then she placed a perfectly skipped stone, 7 skips across a nearby pond, in tribute to a man who had taught her that skill 41 years earlier. "They didn't fail," she told reporters. They succeeded in ways they never knew. Because of them, because of what they tried to do, the truth eventually came out. Children were found. Families were reunited. Justice happened. It took 40 years, but it happened. The Camp Pinewood case remains one of the most complex missing persons investigations in Pacific Northwest history. It's a story of ordinary people who saw evil and chose to fight it, even knowing the cost might be their lives. Sarah Mitchell never got to be the biology teacher she dreamed of being. Tom Bradley never made it to seminary. Rebecca Chen never practiced social work. David Armstrong never bought his land. Lisa Warren never walked down the aisle. James Sullivan never got to see the impact his courage would ultimately have. But they did something more important than any of those dreams. They tried to save children. And in the end, that attempt, even though it cost them their lives, did save children. Just not in the way they expected, and not in the timeline they hoped for. If this story affected you the way it affected me, I need you to do something. First, think about the 6 people who made the hardest choice anyone can make, to risk everything to protect others. Think about the 14 children whose childhoods were stolen. Think about the families who waited decades for answers. Then ask yourself, what would you have done if you were Sarah, Tom, Rebecca, David, Lisa, or James? Would you have run? Would you have reported what you found and hoped for the best? Or would you have stayed hidden, gathered evidence, knowing it might cost you your life? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Would you have spotted the red flags? Do you think the counselors made the right choice? And if this story reminded you of the importance of protecting children, of speaking up when you see something wrong, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Because the truth is, evil thrives in silence. The Hayes brothers operated for 7 years because people looked away, because warning signs were ignored, because it was easier to believe everything was fine than to ask hard questions. The 6 counselors of Camp Pinewood refused to look away. They paid for that courage with their lives. But they also started a chain of events that eventually brought justice. If you want more stories like this, true crime cases with twists you won't see coming and resolutions that restore a little faith in humanity, check out our video on the case of the family that disappeared from their yacht in 1992. What investigators found 30 years later will leave you speechless. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Hit that like button if the story moved you. And remember, the people who stand up against evil don't always win immediately. Sometimes justice takes 40 years, but it's still justice. Thanks for watching. Take care of each other out there.